So, the place where I start off, maybe even when I first picked up the book, was sex addiction. Is that a real thing?
Right. Well, everybody asks that question, and of course, there's a lot of contention about that, and there has been really from the beginning of time. And so I just want to say on this end, just to answer that question, is when I think of sex addiction, I think of it as a syndrome, as a constellation of symptoms that we see in people who come into treatment who are radically abusing and destroying their lives with sex. So the pleasure is long gone. It becomes a balm or an anesthetic for deeper trauma. And I do make the distinction in the book between what we call classic sex addiction versus contemporary sex addiction, meaning that classic sex addiction is really born out of early childhood trauma. And I'm looking at not just what happens, from ages 4 through teenage years, but infancy, early infancy, which is really the work of Dr. Alan Shore. Whereas contemporary sex addiction is really pornography addiction, and that's a whole separate problem. And a lot of the symptoms that people experience come as a result of looking at too much pornography, whereas with classic sex addiction, the symptoms predate the behaviors. So there's really an inverse to the two of them.
Well, I have to say that your book has opened me up to what seems to be somewhat of an ever-expanding set of addictions, so we have not only sex addiction, love addiction, gambling addiction,
food
internet addiction, food addiction,
right.
so on. So, but I think you provide a neurological basis for understanding that, and in fact that it does make sense to use that model.
Well, I really looked at the science. There are over 800 citations in this book. That's partially why it's so thick. The last quarter of it is all citations, and the science is there. And if we think about addiction as a strong predilection for something, that's really the definition of the word. People start to engage in something, and we are highly adaptive creatures, and our brains are very automatic. And when we do something over and over again, and habituation starts to turn into compulsion, these adaptive patterns start to pull us in a particular direction. And with that comes an inability to stop, a constant seeking for the thing over and over again, and compartmentalization, telling ourselves it's not that bad, or I know I'm doing it, but I'm not really doing it, which is a feature of dissociation, by the way. It's one of the criteria for dissociation is having a highly automatic brain, or automaticity, compartmentalization, and altered states of consciousness. And Dan Hill talks about this in his book called Affect Regulation Theory. So these are adaptive patterns. They're attractor states in the brain. We're highly adaptable creatures. And when people start doing something over and over again, and it's habituated, they can't stop doing it.
Yeah, I thought there were a couple of nifty, very short definitions of sex addiction in the book. And I like the very succinct definition that you quote in the book of a pathological relationship with a mood-altering experience.